Welcome everyone, and welcome back to Grumpy Monkey Trading. My name is Michael. It's been a long time since we've had a show, probably too long. I went off and did a bunch of other things, like get my master's and have another kid, and it's been a long time coming back to trading, back to analysis and technical analysis. So I wanted to start the show back up again, but this time with a new show, not Bananarama. I wanted to try something else called predictions. What's predictions about? The point of all this is pretty simple. I want to predict the future, or at least a reasonable approximation of it, using technical analysis, but projecting it into the future. So I'm working on an algorithm to kind of take different stocks and try and see into the future against support and resistance, against different oscillators and technical indicators, and really see what shakes out. So the first one I'm looking at today is Applied Optoelectronics, so AAOI, as well as Disney DIS. So I've run them through the system, and I wanted to take a look at them. Now, to start off, we're going to look at the high level charts just to get an idea of what we would do just traditionally looking at charts, and then we'll see what comes out of my magic algorithm. So let's see. So AAOI, there's some things to like about this. It's had a bit of a recovery over the last few months after taking a bit of a kicking earlier in the year and late last year. So what we see here is we see it advancing, and it has recently kind of pressed up against that upper boundary and broken it. Now you could argue that the upper boundary could also be here, but this is a nice tight boundary. What I like about this stock is a few things, at least in the short term, which is that it does seem to be recovering. And we have a kind of an AAOI pattern going here. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and hopefully blooming into 5 here. We're heading into earnings. I know there was some hope that there would be a pre-announcement this week, and that's part of the surge. A little bit of concern that it's going to turn around in the short term. But what I do like here is a nice cup and handle pattern. It's about the right timeline for a cup and handle. So there's the cup, and there's the handle. So it looks like we're kind of breaking out of the handle as well, which is nice. And this could also be considered a bit of a flag here as well, so a positive flag. So there's a lot to like in terms of the short term. Now, what if it did break out and it is on this last leg of Elliott wave, where could it really get to? So this is the weekly chart. We can see some of the support and resistance lines ahead of us. So I really think it can get into this range, this 55 to 60 range, over the next month or two. Certainly leading into earnings, probably on kind of expectation that they're recovering and doing well. Full disclosure, I do have a position in. I have one option out for 55 at the beginning of next year, and then I'm looking to put another option in, another covered call once it does do a jump, if it does do a jump. So that's what I'm looking at. That's the full disclosure for me. So I am optimistic, at least in the short term, and then we'll see what those earnings come out to be. Now let's take a look at my little algorithm. So for those new, and for really everyone, since everyone's new to me showing this off, these are the last 5 closes. It really only works with closes at the moment. And then the red points are areas that have been marked out as automatically defined resistance, support and resistance lines, programmatically defined. And then the black points represent guesses in the system that have been vetted based on a number of criteria and dropped if possible. So basically we start out with a large amount of guesses and try and vet them in the system against a lot of different criteria. Now, in the short term, we see some of that resistance lines that you saw before, so some of the red lines, and we see it kind of struggling to break really out past that into that 55-60 region that we talked about before, but it is defined up here. So we have that. If it can break through in the next few days, each line here represents one day in the future. So this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so forth. Then it can make a run, a pretty nice little run. But I think it's going to struggle based on how it is currently with some of the metrics to really get above that line. So at least for a couple days, then it might take off. What does that look when it's overlain across the day chart? So here we go with the daily. We can see there's a nice little doji candle there after a nice big volume up. So that's kind of a decision point there, which is a little concerning that we'll have a short-term turnaround. But you can see here that that support and resistance lines really mocks up nicely against it. So you can see that it did as a high touch that high resistance mark, and as a low hit the support line here marked in red. So that's a nice little comfort with the algorithm there. And you can see even here that trend with the red line there is kind of that support line there. So we are marking it out. Now it needs to kind of make a push past that to really get going, and I don't see that happening in the first couple days of the week, barring some news or an event. But it might be able to do it later on in the week. Now, this is a regular pattern, so that represents the extreme. The more normal pattern would be to reside somewhere in this um, representative standard deviation. And then on the downside is that it would struggle to kind of break it. If it did break through this resistance line, it would have slip back. It would slip back quite a bit, would be the result. So, okay, so that's AAOI. So looking good overall in terms of patterns, but could have a short-term kind of think about what it's doing before pushing ahead. Now, if we turn our attention to Disney, we see something that has been rocketing up. I don't have a position in Disney. I wish I did. I used to have a position in Disney at around 103, so in this neighborhood. Now, since then, we've gone and we've done a nice little parabolic move here, which is quite nice. So this is really a bullish signal, leading out of some of that pattern there. And then we have that it also blew by this resistance line, so that's free sailing, and we can look kind of as this line is some of the max of what it could do, particularly if it was escalating quite quickly. Obviously, the Time Warner stuff is very exciting. The streaming option next year is very exciting. Some of their developments in the park are exciting. It's really just what's happening with ESPN that might bring it down come earnings time. The stochastics are obviously very high as well, so that could lead to a short-term downfall, but when you really hit this parabolic move, really nothing can stop it in the short term. So let's take a look at the weekly. We see that it's heading into a major support line though, kind of in that like 111, high 111 territory next week. I assume based on that movement that it will be able to hit it, and it's just a question of whether it can break free again. Now you have a very, if it could, then this represents a major support and resistance line. You can see those inverse slopes there being very equivalent. And so that would be a strong bullish move for the future. And you kind of, if it did explode, you'd wait for it to come back and sit on it for a little bit. And if it didn't break through, then it would continue on. Now let's put this one through the algorithm and see what we get for predictions for next week. You can see here that we have that resistance marked out in that kind of high 111 region. And then we have a bit of a gap up until that 114 region that's a little bit higher than that. So similarly, the algorithm, I'm not sure I totally agree with this decision, but it is math. It says that it'll kind of settle around the 110 region. So the region it's at, I expect probably a high on Monday though, at least to hit up into that 111, 112 that we saw in the weekly. And that it would take a little bit to resurge, and then it could challenge, later in the week or early the following week. But more likely is that it'll kind of settle in this environment. Now these results do change with every day, so obviously this points in this region or points in this region are dependent on points that were defined previously. So if it tanks, then obviously it's not going to recover quite as fast and would wipe out a selection of black points. So really I could do these day after day. My target for trying to do this is to try and estimate covered calls that could be submitted, and I'm trying to refine it down so that I could know that next Friday, for example, it's highly unlikely it would get to like 112 is what I'm kind of going for, so I could sell a covered call at 112. Over time, the goal here is to tighten up those ranges of where I think it would go and to follow patterns. Now, what happens if we overlay it on top? So in this sense, if we mark it out, so there's those 5 closes, then it would have some problems, and then it would try and launch up to that 111, 112 region. But then that would kind of be the cap. Now, the next thing I want to add, hopefully over the week, is some of the Fibonacci probability numbers. So in those sense, I would have those along the bottom, and I'd be able to try and best pick when that turning point would actually be. And I'm going to try and work on that this week so that I can provide results. Predictions is also going to be followed with another show called Results, which will be about the results of the week and how close we really got, and what I can really use to kind of tweak what I'm working on here. So appreciate your feedback. If you have interesting things that you want to include or um, different metrics that you think might be valuable, I'm totally up for taking some feedback. I also think this would be very valuable as a 2-hour initiative or a 1-hour hourly chart initiative, just because there's more variety, more change, I should say. And so I would need to look into what it would cost to do a streaming service or something like that for that, or stream that data. Now, what do we have for these two stocks? As a summary, we have some bullish indicators there, and I'm looking at 55. If it chases it, it probably wouldn't be towards the end of the week. Might sit back a little bit early on. And then Disney, I would say slow down near 112, but it could chase up to 114, depending on some of that momentum that it has in the volume. And at that point, I would expect it to look to tap out. Now, here's the obvious disclaimer, which is don't use any of this advice to trade or try and make money, or you do it at your own risk. Particularly with the algorithm stuff because I'm still working on it, and it will never really be perfect, and I can't de-Trump it, depending on what he tweets. That can wreck any sane strategy in the market. But keep that all in mind. Here's some credits, and I look forward to talking with you next week. Okay.